The knock came just after 9 p.m. Not loud, not frantic, just there. Like someone didn't want to wake the world, only confirm it was still turning. I opened the door to find Leona Park standing on my porch. A hoodie 2 sizes too big, sleeves pulled down past her bruised wrist. A backpack that sagged empty like it had already given up. And her eyes. Not wide with fear, not swollen with tears. Just calm, hollow. Like someone who'd stopped hoping hours ago. She didn't say hi. Didn't ask to come in. She just stood there for a beat and whispered. I left. I didn't ask where from. I already knew. The Park house had always looked picture perfect from the outside. Neatly trimmed lawn. Flagpole by the mailbox. Front porch painted navy with white trim, like something off a postcard. But every kid on our street knew. You don't knock on that door, not unless you want to be reminded what silence sounds like. Leona had been my best friend since middle school. We shared notes, shared hoodies, shared secrets, but never her home life. That part. Always off limits. Always wrapped in that tight, polite smile she wore like armor, until now. I stepped aside. She walked in like a ghost, dropped the backpack beside the hallway table, kicked off her shoes without untying the laces, then sat on the floor like her legs no longer trusted chairs. My mom peeked out from the kitchen, eyebrows raised. I just mouthed, "She's staying." Mom nodded and disappeared back behind the cupboard door. That's all it took. No questions. No judgments. Because sometimes, when someone finally leaves the place that broke them, you don't interrogate the pieces. You just make room. That night, Leona slept on a yoga mat in our laundry room. Her head resting on a rolled-up hoodie. No blanket, no stuffed animal. Just her body, her silence, and something I didn't have a word for yet. Maybe survival. But what none of us knew, not even her, was that she hadn't just left her family that night. She'd left behind the entire system that once depended on her. And that system, it was already starting to crack. I should have noticed sooner. But the thing about quiet girls is, they're trained to disappear before you even learn their shape. Looking back, there were signs, not red flags. More like pale yellow ones, easy to miss if you're not looking too closely. Like the time in 8th grade when we had a group project. We met at her house. While the rest of us flopped on beanbags, arguing over fonts, Leona stayed standing. Washing dishes that weren't hers, wiping counters that were already clean. When I asked if she wanted help, she smiled tight and said, "I'll be faster if I just finish it." Or that one afternoon sophomore year. We walked home from school and I offered to hang out. She hesitated, then muttered, "It's laundry day. Elijah doesn't know how to separate colors." Elijah. Her younger brother by 2 years. But you'd think she worked for him. Every time I came over, he was sprawled on the couch. Gaming headset on, barking orders through the mic. Leona, meanwhile, moved like she was invisible. Folding towels, picking up shoes, refilling the water filter. While their mom sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through church emails. Occasionally tossing a comment over her shoulder. "Leona, wipe that down." Elijah likes his socks double-folded. And remember to remind him about his piano lesson. Not ask, remind, manage, maintain. Their house smelled like lemon polish and silence. The kind that clings to curtains and sinks into your clothes. It wasn't violent. Not that I saw, it was precise. A machine built on expectation. And Leona was the oil that kept it running. She never raised her voice. never said no, never left dishes in the sink, even when she had the flu sophomore year. She still showed up to class with neatly typed notes for Elijah's missed math quiz. I used to envy how put together she seemed, always on time, always organized. The kind of girl teachers trusted with lab keys and bulletin boards. But now I know. She was put together. She was just held together by a system that treated her less like a daughter and more like a utility. Her dad, he ran that house like a training camp, a retired Marine turned disciplinarian by tradition. Never abusive, at least not in ways that left bruises back then. Just commanding. You didn't question. You completed. You didn't explain. You obeyed. When Leona once asked to join the cross-country team, he said, "You've got enough to do around here. Don't get selfish." Selfish, that's what they called her when she asked for space, for rest, for something of her own. Not lazy, not rebellious. Selfish. Because in a house where everything depends on your labor, asking for less isn't defiance. It's betrayal. And yet, every time I asked about her weekend, she'd say the same 3 words. It was fine. Fine, the great camouflage of girls like her. But it wasn't fine. It was slow suffocation in a house that looked like love from the outside. And Leona had been choking for years. Until the night she walked out and left them to breathe their own air for the first time. It took her 3 days to say it out loud, not because she was hiding, but because when pain runs that deep, you have to walk around it first before you can enter. We were in my room, folding socks and watching reruns of some cooking show. When she finally said, "They called a meeting, like it was a boardroom, like I was an employee getting written up." She didn't cry, just kept rolling socks, one tight knot after another. Her dad had texted the night before, "Family meeting, 7 p.m., be on time." She de-hoped, just once it might be about college, maybe even gratitude. But when she walked into the living room, her father was in the recliner. Elijah on the couch, legs stretched like royalty. Her mother standing stiff, arms crossed, already in prosecutor stance. She hadn't even sat down before the trial began. "Elijah says you haven't been folding his clothes. His bathroom's a mess. You've been slacking." Slacking, this girl who used to alphabetize the spice rack. Leona said she blinked, once, then said calmly, clearly, "He's 16. He can fold his own shirts." Me couldn't help it. I laughed. Sharp, bitter. Because of course that made her dad stand up. Of course it did. She said the belt wasn't even hidden. It was on the coffee table, like it had been invited, like they knew this day was coming and wanted to be ready. "Do his chores or get out," he shouted. She didn't move, so he did. The first hit back. The second arm, the third legs. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't plead, and that's what made them angrier, she said, voice flat. The silence. They expected a breakdown. I gave them a mirror. That sentence stayed with me. I paused the show, looked at her. She was still folding socks, like this was just another story. Not the night she stopped being a daughter. When it was over, she continued. He sat down like he'd fixed something, like I was a machine he'd just tuned up. Elijah hadn't looked up from his phone. Her mother had watched the whole thing with arms still crossed. Then came the final blow. "You were raised to serve. That's how the world works," her father had said. And Leona, she had replied, "No, that's how your world works. I'm not your maid. I'm not your daughter. I'm not your property. I'm done." Then she turned, picked up her backpack and walked out. No suitcase, no goodbye, no fear, just exit. And for the first time in 18 years, they had to learn what a house feels like when the engine walks out. The next morning, Leona was already awake before me. I found her sitting at the kitchen table. Back straight, hoodie still on, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Steam rising, eyes steady. She looked like someone preparing for a war that no one else could see. My mom slid a plate of pancakes toward her. She whispered, "Thank you," like it hurt to say. Like gratitude was foreign in her mouth, unfamiliar to her tongue. She ate slowly, carefully, as if someone might take the plate away at any second. After breakfast, she asked for a notebook. Not a phone, not a charger. A notebook. I handed her one from my old English class, half-used, spiral-bound, bent at the corners. She flipped past the essays, found a blank page, and wrote one sentence at the top. Things I did before they said I wasn't enough. Then she started listing. Not memories, not rants, not even emotions. Tasks. Washed Elijah's sheets every Thursday. Scrubbed the baseboards every 1st and 15th. Cleaned out the garage before Father's Day. Reminded Mom about dentist appointments. Replaced broken light bulbs, even the one above the stairs. Hid my honor roll certificate so Elijah wouldn't feel bad. Took the blame for the blender incident. Ate cold rice while everyone else had hot soup. Didn't cry when he yelled. Didn't flinch when she called me ungrateful. The list went on. And on. I watched her hand move like it had been waiting for this its entire life. Like silence was finally tired of being quiet. She wrote for hours. Paused only to stretch, to sip tea, to breathe. No dramatic music. No burning photos. No crying on the floor. Just a girl with a pen, turning her pain into proof. That night, she slept a little deeper, still on the yoga mat, still curled up like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space. But something had shifted. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a blueprint. The next few days, she started doing small things. She asked me to walk her to the post office. She applied for a replacement ID under her own name. Changed her email. Locked her phone line. Requested her school transcripts be redirected to a community college nearby. She didn't say, "I'm leaving forever." She didn't scream, "They'll regret this." She just moved, with purpose. With silence, with precision. Like someone dismantling a bomb she used to live inside, one wire at a time. At one point, I asked her, "Aren't you afraid they'll come looking for you?" She looked at me and said, "They won't." They didn't lose a daughter, they lost a service. And services don't get searched for, they get replaced. That answer broke me in ways I didn't expect, because she wasn't angry. She was sure of her place in their system, sure of the weight she carried, sure that once she was gone, the house would still stand. Until it didn't. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about silent systems. They don't implode. They unravel, thread by invisible thread. A week after Leona left, Maya, my cousin who lives 2 blocks from the Park house, sent me a text. "Is Elijah okay?" He was at the laundromat today. Looked pissed. Dumped clothes into a machine like he'd never used one. Attached was a blurry photo. Elijah standing awkwardly in front of a row of washers. A trash bag of clothes slumped at his feet. Staring at the panel like it was written in ancient Greek. I showed Leona. She didn't laugh. She didn't smirk. She just nodded. He'll figure it out, or he won't. 2 days later, we heard from someone else. Ms. Daniels, our old math teacher, mentioned offhand at the bus stop. Your friend's dad's been showing up late to work. HR nearly wrote him up last week, snapped at a client during a briefing. Apparently, he'd stormed out when someone questioned his numbers. No apology, just silence. The kind of silence that used to scare Leona. Now it followed them. That weekend, Cassie's mom ran into Mrs. Park at the local Korean grocery. She looked off, my mom said later. Asked the cashier to help bag milk, said her back hurt, but her hands were shaking. Back pain. Of course. You notice how bodies start breaking down. When they lose the person who did all the invisible labor. What surprised me most wasn't that things were falling apart. It was how fast the cracks showed when no one was holding the structure together. That's what Leona had always been. Not the roof, not the walls, but the cement between the bricks. Without her, the house still stood, but it groaned, and they noticed, not enough to apologize, but just enough to panic. The first message came on a Thursday from her mother. Elijah has an awards dinner tomorrow. His suit is wrinkled. You need to stop being ridiculous and come home. No, are you safe? No, we miss you. Just a command dressed like an invitation. Leona didn't respond. 4 days later, another one, this time from her father. This is childish. The world won't tolerate your attitude. Come home. Apologize. You can earn your place again. Earn her place? She showed me the message. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just screenshot it, saved it, then deleted the notification. I'm not documenting them for revenge, she said. I'm documenting them so I never forget who they are. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. They weren't angry she was gone. They were angry she left on her own terms. They hadn't lost a daughter. They'd lost control. It wasn't wrapped. No ribbons, no card, just a plain cardboard box, sealed with packing tape. Dropped gently on the Park family's porch at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. She didn't knock, didn't ring the bell, didn't even pause to glance through the window. She just set it down and walked away. I watched from across the street, not because she asked me to. I offered. Some goodbyes don't need an audience. But some truths deserve a witness. Inside the box, a printed ledger 52 pages long. Title page, Unpaid Labor age 10 to 17. Every task, every errand, every instance of invisible work she performed for a family who called her selfish for existing outside their convenience. Folded grocery receipts she'd been sent to buy, but never reimbursed for. A laminated chart of Elijah's medication schedule. She'd memorized it. Post-it notes from her mother. Don't forget to pack his lunch. He has math club. Tidy up before Dad gets home. You know how he gets. And at the very bottom, a birthday card from when she turned 13, signed in her mother's careful handwriting. We didn't plan for you, but God must have had a purpose. Next to it, a broken locket. The one she was given at 14, with a quote engraved inside. So you remember we didn't have to keep you. Cassie, me. I couldn't breathe for a minute after reading that. That kind of cruelty. It's not shouted. It's whispered into gifts and folded into traditions. It's passed down like fine china, delicate, deliberate, and always dangerous. 2 hours later, Maya texted me. They haven't come out yet. Then around 9 a.m., the dad opened the door. He looked down at the box like it had teeth. Didn't open it outside, just picked it up and shut the door. No police were called, no messages were sent, just quiet. But not the heavy silence Leona grew up in. This one, it was hollow, echoing, because this time it wasn't her silence, it was theirs, and they didn't know what to do with it. Because when you're used to someone doing everything for you, the day they stop feels like the whole world refusing to move. And maybe that's exactly what she wanted them to feel. Not rage, not shame, just absence. Leona didn't move far, just 12 blocks away. A studio apartment above a bookstore, with one window that faced a brick wall. A shower that only had 2 settings, boiling and glacier. And a stove with exactly 2 working burners. She called it freedom. I called it a start. The first night in her new place, she didn't sleep. She arranged her books by color, hung one photo on the wall, us at homecoming, laughing, and placed her notebook, the ledger, in a drawer she locked, not to hide, but to choose, because now her story belonged to her, not as a burden, but as evidence. She got a part-time job at the bookstore downstairs, registered for night classes in electrical systems, woke up early, cooked oatmeal, took the bus. She folded her own laundry on Sundays, 2 loads, one for clothes, one for bed sheets. No one told her to, no one expected it. But she did it anyway, because it was hers. And every Friday night without fail, she lit a candle, nothing scented, nothing fancy, just a little flame, steady and warm, flickering in the quiet, not for religion, not for ceremony, just because. She could, because no one was yelling from the other room. No one was handing her a chore list. No one was measuring her worth by the cleanliness of the counters. I'd visit on weekends. Sometimes we'd cook. Sometimes we just sat, legs folded on the floor, watching the candle burn, and she'd say things like, "I thought I'd feel guilty, but I just feel light." I used to think I owed them a version of myself that made them comfortable. Now I know I owe myself more than that. Meanwhile, the updates still trickled in, not because she asked, but because the world is small, and pain echoes louder in empty halls. Her dad collapsed at a grocery store. They say it was stress. Elijah got kicked out of a prep program, couldn't meet deadlines. Her mom joined a Facebook group, parents of estranged teens. She posted threads like, "When they forget who fed them," "How to forgive ungrateful daughters." Leona never commented, never replied, never posted back. She didn't need to, because she didn't win by shouting. She won by living, by waking up each morning to a space that was hers, by folding socks that only her feet would wear, by choosing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. One afternoon, walking back from class, we passed her old street. I slowed. She didn't. Didn't glance at the park house. Didn't look toward the porch where she once left that box. Just kept walking, keys in hand, groceries in bag, a quiet in her chest that didn't feel empty anymore. "They train me to serve," she said, almost to herself. So I let them collapse without me. They taught me to be silent, so I made my silence the sentence they now serve. They called me worthless, and I gave them exactly that nothing. Not rage, not vengeance, not even a second chance, just nothing, except a candle that still burns. Every Friday night, in a studio that smells like peace and sounds like freedom. If you've ever had to walk away just to breathe, drop a comment that says, "I walked too." Not for attention, not for drama, just to remind someone else. That silence can be power, and absence sometimes is the loudest truth of all.